On December 25, 2017, Beach Drive and Goodwin Street in Oak Bay, Victoria, Canada, buzzed with the spirit of Christmas. The homes and apartments were aglow with festive cheer, decorated Christmas trees, windows shimmering with twinkling lights, and even illuminated Santas and candy canes. Later on, however, the atmosphere in the neighborhood took an unexpected turn. The festive lighting was replaced by the flashing red and blue lights of police vehicles swarming the area. Oak Bay is a seaside community of around 20,000 people in the Greater Victoria area of Canada. Sarah Cotton called Oak Bay home, and in 2009 she crossed paths with a man named Aubrey Berry. They were both working at BC Ferries, a publicly owned ferry service that provided transport between the mainland and various coastal islands. Before that, Sarah had gained experience as an intern at the University of Victoria and later worked in communications at Tartan Group. Their initial connection blossomed into a family with the birth of two daughters, Chloe in 2011 and Aubrey in 2013. However, despite a promising start, Sarah and Andre's relationship eventually took a dark turn. The turbulence began to surface shortly after the tragic death of Sarah's father in 2013. Andre's behavior became increasingly problematic, marked by frequent outbursts and verbal abuse directed at Sarah. These instances of aggression escalated, leaving Sarah feeling vulnerable and bereft of the protection she once relied upon. During one heated argument over the family's universal childcare benefit, Andre threatened to blow up the house. The strain on their relationship manifested in Andre's erratic and dangerous behavior, especially when he became angry. He would drive recklessly and speed, even when their young daughters were passengers in the car. The once promising marriage had devolved into a tumultuous and unsafe environment for Sarah and her children. After a couple of months, Sarah reached a breaking point and decided to end the relationship with Andre. Things came to a head on the day he was scheduled to move out of the family home. Sarah was alone in the bedroom when Andre burst in and pinned her to the bed, holding her down by her wrists. Once Sarah broke free, she grabbed her cell phone and called the police. They arrived promptly and detained Andre. Sarah obtained a restraining order that kept him from contacting her or the girls. After Andre moved into his own apartment, Sarah and the girls continued with their lives. Sarah assumed the role of a single mother, showering her two girls with affection and dedicating all of her time to them. This routine persisted for 3 months before a peace bond was amended, allowing Andre supervised visits with Chloe and Aubrey. However, the subsequent years brought forth challenges surrounding child support and the co-ownership of their home. Despite a court order mandating child support payments, Andre refused to comply for 2 years. Eventually, Sarah was granted the opportunity to acquire Andre's $60,000 share of their home for approximately $20,000, with the judge taking into account the outstanding child support that he owed. The situation took an even darker turn when Sarah discovered a soft spot on Aubrey's head after her return from her father's care. Another time, Aubrey reported that her father had inappropriately touched her. These alarming revelations triggered an investigation by the Ministry of Children and Family Development into Andre's conduct. Throughout the inquiry, Andre's visits with Chloe and Aubrey were supervised, and ministry officials recommended that he undergo parenting classes. However, they found no evidence that the touching was sexual or criminal in nature. The custody battle reached its climax when it went to trial towards the end of 2016. Sarah expressed concerns about Andre's ability to properly care for the girls, accusing him of once leaving one of them in a stroller in a public place, just a short distance from his view. She also alleged that he spoke negatively about her to their daughters and cited Aubrey's claims of inappropriate touching. In response, Andre vehemently denied the accusations, testifying that he had only tickled Aubrey, not engaged in inappropriate touching. The courtroom became a battleground for conflicting narratives, with each side presenting their version of events in a bid to determine the future of the family dynamic. Justice Victoria Gray delivered the final ruling, awarding primary custody to Sarah, while Andre was granted intermittent custody on a 14-day rotating schedule. This schedule included overnight stays on weekdays and weekends, as well as almost every other holiday. In making the announcement, Justice Gray acknowledged that Andre was a loving father who had much to offer his daughters. However, she voiced concerns about Andre's care for the girls, citing the accusations made by Sarah. Justice Gray further remarked that Andre had exercised poor judgment in dealing with the children. This included saying negative things about their mother, actions that led to the MCFD investigation, and his present arrangement of sometimes sleeping together with one or more of the girls. Despite these concerns, the judge ultimately concluded that Andre's aggressive behavior was transient and relatively minor. Justice Gray's decision was grounded in the assessment that Chloe and Aubrey were generally happy and healthy. She believed that their well-being would be enhanced by maintaining a relationship with their father through scheduled visits. The judge sought to strike a balance between recognizing Andre's positive qualities as a parent and addressing the valid concerns raised about his judgment and behavior in caring for the girls. By now, Chloe was 6 years old and Aubrey was 4. Both were vibrant and content little girls, each with their unique personalities and interests. Chloe was a grade 1 student at Christ Church Cathedral School and had recently developed a passion for horseback riding, taught by her cousin. Her family described her as remarkably wise, clever, and articulate, possessing an open heart and a keen sense of humor. Chloe was known for her considerate nature and artistic flair. As for Aubrey, she was in the process of transitioning from toddlerhood to a little girl, displaying burgeoning self-assurance and determination. Described by her family as a spirited and wild child, Aubrey found joy in silliness and loved experimenting with her mother's makeup. In her final year of preschool at St. Christopher's Montessori School, Aubrey had recently taken on the role of Gabriel the Angel in the Nativity play, showcasing her evolving confidence. In the aftermath of the separation, Sarah's devotion to her daughters became even more pronounced. Tricia reflected on Sarah's maternal qualities, saying, "Sarah was just one of those mothers who was born to be a mother and did an exceptionally great job with them in every possible way." Despite the challenges, the resilient bond between Sarah and her daughters always shone through. On the evening of December 21st, Sarah dropped off her daughters, Chloe and Aubrey, at their father's apartment on Beach Drive in Goodwin Street. His apartment was in a very desirable area, just a stone's throw from the marina and overlooking the Pacific coast. The neighborhood was adorned with festive decorations, twinkling lights on roofs, Christmas trees visible through windows, and colorful candy canes displayed outside. Despite the festive atmosphere, Andrew's apartment was unusually dark. As Sarah pulled up outside, she wondered if Andrew was home. Chloe reassured her, explaining that the lights were always off at their father's place. Turning to her mother, she cheerfully said, "We use flashlights. It's just like camping." Aware of Andrew's financial struggles since leaving his job in May, Sarah wondered if the electricity had been disconnected but decided not to bring it up. Chloe's comment lingered in her mind, and she considered discussing it later, not wanting to spoil Christmas. She made a mental note to address it at a more appropriate time. Sarah bade farewell to her daughters, reminding them to be on their best behavior, before returning home alone to finalize preparations for Christmas Day. The plan was for Chloe and Aubrey to spend time with their father, Andrew, until noon on Christmas Day, after which he would return them to Sarah. However, Sarah found herself making an unplanned visit back to Andrew's apartment the next morning. Chloe had left behind her favorite stuffed toy, Lami, and Sarah drove over to return it. Parking outside the apartment, she gently tapped on the window. Chloe and Aubrey's faces appeared through the blinds, welcoming their mother with smiles. Sarah recollected that Chloe was wearing a dragon costume with a tail. She told them that she loved them and gave them both a hug. As Christmas dawned, Sarah awoke in her empty home, eagerly counting down the moments until her girls returned. Their Christmas presents were wrapped and waiting for them under the Christmas tree, while their stockings were filled to the brim with gifts. Sarah was anticipating Chloe and Aubrey's arrival at noon and the visit of her parents, Brenda and Malcolm, at 2 p.m. Her excitement was palpable. However, as noon came and went, Andrew failed to appear with the girls. Sarah frantically called and texted Andrew, but her calls and texts went unanswered. She then called his sister, but her calls to Andrew also went unanswered. At 2 p.m., Sarah's parents, Brenda and Malcolm, arrived. It was decided that Sarah and Brenda would travel over to Andrew's apartment. Sarah speculated that Andrew was being difficult just for the sake of it, but Malcolm stayed behind in case Andrew and the girls returned. Upon arriving at the apartment, Sarah and Brenda knocked on one of the front windows, expecting to see the girls' faces pop up behind the blinds. However, the apartment appeared eerily silent. They tried reaching Andrew again, but their calls went unanswered. Sarah and Brenda's desperation grew. They spoke with a neighbor who had heard the girls earlier, but had noticed silence since. Another neighbor reported hearing loud crashing noises and thuds coming from the apartment that morning. Panic set in, and without hesitation, Sarah and Brenda reported the girls as missing. Constable Peter Olenek from Oak Bay was the first to arrive outside Andrew's apartment after Sarah reported Chloe and Aubrey missing. He knocked on the front door, but there was no response. Turning the handle, he discovered the door was unlocked. Slowly opening it, he found the interior shrouded in darkness. With the flick of his flashlight, Constable Olenek illuminated a horrifying scene. Blood smeared across the walls and floor. When he called out for Andrew and the girls, he was met with silence. As his flashlight swept across the rooms, he spotted what appeared to be a small, lifeless form on one of the beds. Disturbed by the sight, he closed the door behind him and called for backup. Moments later, Sergeant Michael Martin, the constable's supervisor, arrived at the apartment. In shock, Olenek said he believed he saw a lifeless body in one of the bedrooms. The two entered the apartment together, with Martin noting the pervasive darkness, illuminated only by the haunting traces of blood that stood out against the bright light from their flashlights. Upgrading the incident from a Code 3 to Code 4, marking the severity of the scene, Martin drew his firearm, uncertain of what they were going to find inside. Passing the decorated Christmas tree, they followed one of the trails of blood into the bathroom. Shining their flashlights into the pitch-black room, they illuminated a bloody bathtub. Lying naked in the tub was Andrew, suffering from stab wounds to his chest and throat. His chest was slowly rising and falling with each labored breath. Martin instructed Olenek to stay with Andrew while he continued his search. He entered the master bedroom, where he found a bed that was saturated with blood. On top of it was a small figure with blood-matted hair and blood-stained pajamas. It was Chloe. Desperately checking for a pulse, Martin found none. Chloe's cold, stiff body bore evidence of lacerations and stab wounds. A bloody baseball bat was entangled in her blood-soaked hair. Radioing dispatch, Martin reported a deceased child and an injured man, urgently requesting an ambulance. Continuing his search, he followed the blood trail to the second bedroom. There, illuminated by his flashlight, he could see blood splattered on the walls, floor, and even on the horizontal blinds. On the bed lay Aubrey, also clothed in blood-soaked pajamas and not moving. Like her older sister, she displayed signs of lacerations and stab wounds. Her body was cold and stiff. Martin contacted dispatch again, stating that he would do a second check of pulses. But before he could, Oak Bay Constable Sandrine Perry arrived on the scene. She offered to check the pulses, and as Martin later recalled, they decided it was prudent to get a second opinion. Unfortunately, he wasn't wrong. Both Chloe and Aubrey were dead, and rigor mortis had already set in, indicating they had been deceased for some time. Andrew, however, was still alive in the bathroom. First responders worked on him with minimal lighting. They noted chest wounds, a throat wound, and a large swollen eye, but none of the injuries appeared to be actively or profusely bleeding. There wasn't enough room in the bathroom to tend to Andrew, so paramedics planned on bringing him out into the hallway. As they carefully lifted him from the bathtub onto a stretcher, Andrew uttered, "Kill me. Just kill me." The apartment was soon shrouded in crime scene tape as Andrew was transported to the hospital, accompanied by Constable Olenek. Sergeant Martin harbored fears that Andrew might not survive the journey. Later he remarked, Sometimes when people pass away, they leave dying declarations. In the early stages of the investigation, detectives developed a theory. They suspected Andrew had taken the lives of Chloe and Aubrey before attempting to end his own. Chloe and Aubrey were taken to the medical examiner's office, where an autopsy revealed the extent of their injuries. Chloe had suffered a devastating blow to the head with a baseball bat, fracturing her skull. She was then subjected to 26 stab wounds, some inflicted prior to her death and others post-mortem. Aubrey endured 32 stab wounds, leading to fatal blood loss. The brutality of these crimes became heartbreakingly evident, as both girls had been turned over at least twice by their assailant to inflict injuries on both sides of their bodies. At the crime scene, detectives worked meticulously to gather evidence. Inside the bathroom, they discovered a pair of jeans stiffened with dried blood and a long-sleeved t-shirt soaked in it. In Aubrey's bedroom, a black-handled knife lay abandoned on the floor. Experts combed through the apartment, navigating an overwhelming amount of blood evidence. A specialized team analyzed transfer stains, swipe marks, and fingerprints throughout the home. The living room displayed a drip trail of blood and 21 patterned socked foot transfer stains. In the kitchen, swipe marks adorned the fridge, stove, and cabinets. Blood was even found inside a kitchen drawer, indicating that someone with bloodied hands had rummaged through it. The evidence painted a chilling picture of someone moving methodically through the apartment, pausing at each bed before continuing their grim actions. Void spaces of blood at the end of each bed suggested where the fatal injuries were inflicted on Chloe and Aubrey. Amid the chaos, a note in the living room offered a heartbreaking glimpse of innocence. It read, "Dear Santa, enjoy the bunny crackers. From Chloe, Aubrey, and Andy. Merry Christmas." Another note left by the girls offered Santa an unopened toothbrush to use after eating the crackers. In a different room, detectives found a suicide note written by Andrew. Addressed to his sister, it listed grievances against Sarah and their mother. The note expressed feelings of betrayal and despair, ending with, "I decided to leave with the kids. I love you and your children, but I felt it was better for myself and the kids to escape." Further investigation revealed no signs of forced entry into the apartment. Despite the bloody crime scene inside, there were no traces of blood outside, no bloody footprints, no blood on the door handle. This absence of evidence suggested the perpetrator had not left the apartment. Detectives theorized that after attacking his daughters, Andrew retreated to the bathroom, removed his bloodied clothes, and attempted to take his own life. Andrew underwent surgery at the hospital, but his injuries were not life-threatening. Upon regaining consciousness, he was guarded by detectives. He never once inquired about his daughter's well-being. During a visit from his sister, he pointed to his chest wound and simply stated, "I did this." Following his discharge from the hospital, Andrew was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. Sarah was already at the police station with her parents when she received the devastating news that her daughters had been killed. The silence of the station was shattered by her anguished screams. Reflecting on that moment, Sarah later said, "I screamed like never before. I was in complete shock." The family, seeking privacy, designated Sarah's close friend Tricia as their spokesperson. In a public statement, Tricia said, "Sarah has a couple of us who have been with her ever since, taking care of her as best we can. We are very grateful for the remarkable outpouring of support from everywhere." As the investigation continued, details of the custody battle between Sarah and Andrew emerged. Allegations of prior incidents raised questions about whether Child Protection Services had adequately responded to concerns. Bernard Richard, British Columbia's independent advocate for children and youth, announced a review of the case, stating the importance of ensuring no shortcomings had occurred. Marie McDougall from Battered Women's Support Services highlighted the need for enhanced training to help judges recognize the warning signs of family violence. McDougall emphasized the gravity of domestic homicide as a predictable yet preventable crime, attributing the failure to take it seriously to systemic issues of minimization and denial. She specifically asserted that Justice Victoria Gray, the judge overseeing the custody battle, had downplayed the allegations against Andrew. In contrast, Miriam Sevo, president of the Law Society of BC, held a differing perspective. She argued that the case was akin to the thousands of disputes processed by the courts annually, challenging the notion that it stood out as unique. Chief Justice Christopher Hinkson also spoke up in defense of the judge. He said he didn't think the evidence presented during the custody battle suggested that Andrew was likely to commit murder. He pointed out that Justice Gray wasn't responsible for assessing Andrew's fitness to visit Chloe and Aubrey, but instead, her role was to determine the logistics of shared custody while investigations and reviews continued. A public funeral for Chloe and Aubrey took place at Christ Church Cathedral, drawing over 400 mourners. At the front of the church, a photograph of the sisters sat facing the pews, surrounded by flowers. Those in attendance wore pink and purple ribbons, Chloe and Aubrey's favorite colors. Sarah sat at the very front of the church, clutching tightly to a tissue. The clergy described the funeral as a home of memory and hope, but also acknowledged the anger and pain of what had happened. The girls' aunt, Emma Cotton, described them as true angels who would forever be missed and loved. In the aftermath of the funeral, Chloe and Aubrey were cremated. Detectives swiftly uncovered the stormy dynamic between Andrew and Sarah, along with the ongoing custody battle. Delving deeper into the investigation, a troubling financial portrait of Andrew emerged. In the lead-up to the tragic deaths of Chloe and Aubrey, Andrew faced severe financial woes. He had resigned from his job at BC Ferries in May 2017 and was consistently falling behind on rent payments, grappling with utility disconnections by BC Hydro. Compounding his troubles was Andrew's escalating gambling addiction, which had its roots in his days as a bouncer at Sutton Place, a hotel where he earned up to $200 in cash per shift. Initially engaged in baccarat, a competitive card game, Andrew's gambling approach shifted over time. Instead of leaving when he lost, he began borrowing money from fellow players, earning him the nickname Almost, due to his near misses when repaying borrowed sums. Following his separation from Sarah, Andrew's gambling habits spiraled out of control, and he was spending around $3,000 a month on gambling. Despite a momentary windfall of $100,000 in the fall of 2015, Andrew lost the entire sum within a week. Desperate for funds, Andrew allegedly borrowed $10,000 from an individual named Paul. But his mounting debt snowballed due to high interest rates, and by the spring of 2017, Andrew allegedly owed Paul a staggering $225,000. To settle the debt, Andrew considered cashing in on his pension. Quitting his job at BC Ferries became a necessary step to access his pension, further exacerbating his financial strain. With his visa and line of credit maxed out, and his bank accounts in perpetual overdraft, Andrew resorted to asking neighbors for food, citing an inability to afford meals for his daughters when they came to visit. Around a month before the tragic deaths of Chloe and Aubrey, Andrew took an even darker turn, actively searching for suicide methods. Detectives believed that somewhere along the way, the girls became part of Andrew's suicide plan. In March, it was announced that the murder case would forego preliminary hearings, proceeding directly to the Supreme Court. As the months passed, the approach of Christmas 2018 loomed steadily, and on the anniversary of the girls' murders, Sarah urged everyone to concentrate on their light rather than the darkness surrounding their deaths. Jury selection for the murder trial began in December 2018, culminating in the finalization of the jury on the 16th. During opening statements, Prosecutor CLA Jannings provided the jury with a detailed overview of what to expect during the trial. She outlined the deteriorating relationship between Andrew and Sarah, highlighting Andrew's financial struggles leading up to the double murder. Furthermore, she revealed that Andrew had been researching suicide methods just a month prior to the tragic events. The trial's first witness, Constable Peter Aneni, the initial officer at the scene, testified. Following his account, defense attorney Kevin McCullough accused detectives of mishandling the case. McCullough argued that they exhibited tunnel vision, solely focusing on Andrew as the killer. He suggested that Constable Aneni's decision to leave the apartment to wait for backup was a mistake, contending that the real killer might have escaped during that interval. The defense had not presented any opening statements, but it quickly became apparent that their strategy was to claim Andrew's innocence. McCulloch suggested it would have taken someone mere seconds to leave through a back exit door while the constable stood outside. His testimony was followed by Sergeant Michael Martin, his supervisor. Martin was asked by Prosecutor Patrick Ware if he considered freezing the crime scene until obtaining a warrant. He said no, but then added that he didn't think it was a prudent thing to do. In responding to the call, he testified that his priority was to get in as fast as possible and render assistance to anyone who may have needed it. Brad Tranholm from the Oak Bay Fire Department testified next. He said he knew the call would be traumatic as soon as it was engaged, but he had no memory of forming conclusions about what had happened while at the apartment. He emotionally told the jury, "I can't remember most of the night, to be honest. I don't know if that's from the nature of the call with children involved. It's quite traumatic." He testified that his paramedics worked on Andrew in the bathroom, and that Andrew had asked them to kill him. After testimony focusing on the crime scene, defense attorney McCulloch made reference to another crime that occurred on April 25, 2017. A woman had been stabbed and slashed around a kilometer away from Andrew's apartment, but no one had been arrested in connection with it. The defense attorney appeared to suggest that the person who committed that attack might have also been responsible for the double murder of Chloe and Aubrey. Following this testimony, the bloody pajamas that the girls were wearing when they were killed were presented to the courtroom. Chloe's pajama shirt was so saturated in blood that only a small dry patch revealed the shirt's original light pink color. There were puncture holes all across the shirt, including the front, back, and sides. Aubrey's pajama shirt was also stained in blood to the point where the original color, purple with white, was indistinguishable. Her shirt had stab wounds to the arms, the wrist, and the front and back. Andrew, who was sitting alongside his defense team, burst into tears, which led his defense attorney to ask for a break. Upon returning to the courtroom, more evidence from inside the apartment was presented. The jury heard about Andrew's blood-stained clothing found in the bathroom and the lack of forced entry into the apartment. Testimony was also presented about the blood found inside the kitchen drawer. It was revealed that there were no bloody shoe prints in the apartment, only bloody sock prints. After the frantic evidence was presented, Sarah was called to testify. She detailed the events leading up to the murders, telling the court that she was deeply concerned about the girls staying with Andrew because he had no electricity or heat. After dropping them off, she had sent Andrew a couple of emails, but he didn't reply. She had an order of protection that notified her when her emails were read, and she testified that one was read on December 21st, but the rest were ignored. She testified about the moment she learned her girls had been killed. Before defense attorney McCulloch allowed text and email exchanges between Sarah and Andrew to be presented, these messages centered around arranging pickups, drop-offs, and field trip preparations. He said these communications demonstrated a good co-parenting relationship. Sarah agreed, telling the courtroom, "I felt like it was in the best interest of the girls to communicate as much as possible." When she was asked whether Andrew was trying his best, she replied, "I don't know. You would have to ask him." During cross-examination, Sarah spoke about the custody agreement. Andrew's defense accused her of making up allegations that he had inappropriately touched Aubrey. She denied that she had, explaining that she had only reported what Aubrey had told her because it was her responsibility. Following her testimony, Valley Travers took to the witness stand. She lived above Andrew and testified about the noises she heard coming from his apartment the morning the girls were discovered dead. She said there were movements in the apartment, but she didn't hear any screaming, nor did she hear the girls' footsteps at all. During the second week of the trial, a profound hush enveloped the courtroom as Andrew's defense team presented their opening statements. They argued that the murders of Chloe and Aubrey were connected to a substantial debt Andrew allegedly owed to a loan shark named Paul. Andrew then took the witness stand, adamantly asserting his innocence in the deaths of Chloe and Aubrey and denying any attempt on his own life. He candidly unraveled the narrative of his gambling addiction, exposing his alleged financial entanglements with a man named Paul. Andrew testified that he had asked Paul for an extension to pay back the gambling debt he owed. According to Andrew, Paul agreed but said there was a catch. Andrew had to store a bag in his apartment. In a calm tone, he explained to the jury, "I wouldn't have to do anything. I wouldn't have to see it. I wouldn't have to touch it." Under questioning from defense attorney McCulloch, Andrew speculated about the bag's contents, suggesting it likely contained something illegal, possibly drugs. According to Andrew's testimony, in March, two young Asian men, one with a sleeve of tattoos, stored the bag on the top shelf of his closet. He continued to stare at the bag. Despite his efforts to scrape together funds over the following months, he could not meet the amount due. The funds Andrew had managed to amass only served to increase his debt by an additional $25,000. Andrew revealed that Paul once again requested him to store another bag, but this time he had to surrender the key to his apartment. He claimed that he didn't hear from Paul or the two men between the second bag drop-off in November and Christmas Day. When questioned about Paul, Andrew asserted that he didn't know Paul's surname, only that Paul was a tall Chinese man in his 50s. The focus then shifted to the events of Christmas morning. Andrew recalled that he and the girls had spent several hours playing in the snow. Upon returning to the apartment, he described the process of removing Chloe and Aubrey's wet clothing and dressing them in their pajamas. Andrew said he then went into the bedroom, where he was abruptly tackled onto the bed and stabbed in the throat. He vividly expressed the searing pain coursing through his body before losing consciousness. Amid sobs, Andrew emotionally testified, "When I wake up, I crawl over to Chloe's bed, prop myself up on my knees, and I reach out and touch Chloe. And she's dead. There's blood everywhere. There's just blood everywhere." According to Andrew, he then moved to the kitchen, grabbed a knife in an effort to defend himself. However, he claimed he was overpowered again, thrown to the ground, and then stabbed once more. He described the assailant as someone of similar height with dark skin and dark hair, but insisted it wasn't one of the individuals associated with Paul or Paul himself. He recounted the next memory he had. "I woke up in the bathtub, surrounded by the sounds of police." During cross-examination, Andrew addressed the suicide note discovered in the apartment. He claimed that he had written it back in November, revealing that he had attempted suicide by hanging at the end of that month. The prosecution asked Andrew whether he was worried about Chloe and Aubrey's safety when he was storing what was presumably drugs in his apartment. He acknowledged that, in hindsight, it was potentially very dangerous, but at the time, he didn't think it was a big deal. Prosecutor Patrick Ware then posed the question that had been on everyone's mind. If Andrew Berry was genuinely innocent, why had he not disclosed crucial information to anyone immediately after the incident? Not a single inquiry about the well-being of his daughters was made during his time at the hospital, nor did he mention the narrative of an intruder. Andrew's response was that he simply wished to be left alone to die. Following Andrew's testimony, the trial concluded. In his closing arguments, defense attorney Kevin McCulloch emphasized the importance of reasonable doubt and the presumption of innocence. He repeatedly asserted that it was the prosecution's responsibility to conclusively prove Andrew's guilt. McCulloch contended, "When you peel back the onion on this case, the Crown has not proven Mr. Berry's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt." He argued that the entire case was circumstantial, pointing to the location and timing of Andrew and the girls' discovery as the only certain facts. The defense also pointed to the suicide note, arguing that it demonstrated Andrew's concern for his daughter's well-being. McCulloch suggested that Andrew's research into peaceful suicide methods should cast doubt on his injuries, questioning the logic of his claims. The prosecution, led by Patrick Ware, presented a contrasting perspective. Ware asserted that Andrew was responsible for the murders, citing resentment towards Sarah as the motive. He suggested that, facing the prospect of losing custody of the girls due to financial instability and a hazardous living environment, Andrew decided that if he couldn't have them, neither could Sarah. The prosecutor dismissed Andrew's claims of an intruder, arguing that, like everything else in his life, Andrew wouldn't accept responsibility. There was no Paul, no dark-skinned child murderer. It's self-serving, illogical, and at some point defies the laws of physics. Ladies and gentlemen, this attack simply didn't happen. After the closing arguments, the jury deliberated for 3 days before delivering a verdict. They found Andrew Berry guilty on both counts of second-degree murder. Andrew Berry was ultimately sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 22 years. The courtroom was stunned, with many feeling that the minimum sentence fell far short of justice. Andrew Berry will be eligible for parole at the age of 67, but Chloe and Aubrey will forever remain 6 and 4 in the hearts of those who mourn their tragic loss.